Spongebob Squarepants is a show that undoubtedly would be in the Nickelodeon Hall of Fame. It's one of, if not the most well-celebrated and critically acclaimed cartoons that the network has had, and for good reason. The original seasons of the show were comedic gold. The characters were relatable and charming as well, each bringing a different feel to the show and meshing together quite well. And while some seasons are steeped in infamy amongst the community, the show to this day still has a large cult following, with the latest season still dropping solid episodes to this day. So you would think that since Nick is rebooting one of their most popular IPs, they would essentially follow the same formula, but adding a unique twist to it. However, they do not. And that's what we'll be talking about today. I'm Papercut, and today, let's talk about The Patrick Star Show.
And this is my show!
The Patrick Star Show is the second reboot to come out of the SpongeBob franchise, the first being Camp Coral. The show revolves around Patrick, as you probably guessed, hosting his own TV show with his family. The show is set in a completely different environment, this wacky, cartoonish place. Now you would think that because this is the Patrick Show, it would be mostly about Patrick, and Patrick, no pun intended, would be the star of the show. However, he is not. And we'll get into that issue and many more as we look at Enemies a la Mode. The episode begins with Patrick spinning a wheel to decide what he should do for his show. So, you would naturally think that this episode focuses on the actual TV show aspect itself, and what Patrick goes through when making it, but it doesn't. So Patrick's sister, Squidina, who is also the producer of Patrick's show, comes into the picture and asks how his ideas are coming along. So now you would think that this episode delves into their relationship as not only producer and star, but brother and sister. However, they do not. So none of this here actually matters. Instead, we get this.
I'm sure you'll come up with a neat show idea, like Glee?
It's him! Sweet Neptune!
Instead of giving us a plot about Patrick as a character, with different character traits and variation, we get an episode where they hyper-focus on one trait of Patrick's character, his gluttony. While true that has always been a part of his character, I don't think it's ever been so exaggerated and at the front of his character before. I feel like the modern seasons, especially seasons 9 through 12, was where this became really apparent to me. Instead of giving him character and motivations beyond his love for food, oftentimes it is the driving force of the episode. They do this over and over and over again, and it is never given any variation other than he's a fat glutton, and that's where the humor stems from. It gets to the point of becoming predictable, as you already know what type of jokes are going to be set up, thus ruining the experience before it even begins. But that's not to say that the episode doesn't have any funny jokes.
Looks like you made quite the impression.
You see, the reason why I found that funny was because I wasn't expecting it. And it also makes use of the show's biggest theme, its wackiness and absurdness. The black and white crowd catches you off guard because of how little sense it would make to have that in a cartoon, which gives it its funny nature. However, none of this lasts long. Anything that I found in this episode never lasted more than a few seconds.
Oh no! There's no show until I get my ice cream!
So they showed us in the beginning that Patrick was trying to get ideas for his show, but got distracted by the ice cream. Now they show us that he isn't going to do his show until he gets his ice cream. It doesn't make sense for Patrick to switch his motivations around so quickly. If he really did care about making an idea for his show, he shouldn't be so stubborn to not do it because of something he already gets too much of already. It makes Patrick's character look so one-dimensional, which ties into my problem from before. Why should I care about Patrick trying to make a show when he doesn't even care about making his show, and you're instead going to give me the same Patrick that I've gotten from OG SpongeBob, which actually has a more interesting version of Patrick in it? If you want to reboot an IP and set it in a new environment, make use of that new environment, and that's one of the biggest problems about the show. It fails to carve out an identity for itself. It just feels like the original show with less character and charm. Squidina, for example, is just the Sandy of this show, but with less character. She hasn't really been developed to be more than just Patrick's manager and producer, and sometimes I even forget they're related. She doesn't have anything about her that stands out in this episode. She just does what the plot needs her to do. In that way, she's probably the most underdeveloped character in the whole family, but we'll get to the rest of them later. And if it wasn't bad enough that they waste our time with Patrick's character in the beginning, they waste even more of our time, almost 2 minutes of it in fact, with a pre-recorded segment of the show that really has nothing to offer to me in terms of humor or any kind of development. The only part that kind of got a laugh out of me was this bit, but other than that, it's almost like they animated the segment but couldn't make it into an actual episode, so they just put it here to fill out the time. It's really jarring in fact, and although it sets up the rest of Squidina's part of the episode, where she makes a segment about enemies, they could have used this time for that segment, so there really is no excuse. This is just plain padding out time.
Hey, Mom, do you have any enemies?
Well, of course not, dear. I love everybody. Oh, but this toaster is really starting to tick me off.
Moving on, seeing as how Patrick gave up on his show, Squidina decides to interview the rest of her family on whether they have enemies or not. She talks to her mother first, who is trying to toast a piece of bread, and we actually get a few decently funny jokes here that highlight what the Patrick Star Show could be if it used its strength to its advantage.
Oh, I see the problem now. I forgot to plug it in!
This scene really stuck out to me as one of the more creative and funnier scenes in the show. It really highlights how wacky and absurd the animators can get when they really put their minds to it. I also love how she goes from angry and frustrated to calm and collected in a flash when she realizes she forgot to plug the toaster in. The pun was also a neat gag, despite the fact that I usually hate puns, so extra props to the episode for doing that. It's disappointing to see how much potential this show has, but isn't delivering on, and that's why the show doesn't work in my opinion.
If this keeps up, I'm gonna lose my lunch. Oh boy, lunchtime!
Yes, because every time you mention food, you have to make the obvious joke about it. Even though this whole episode, Patrick is doing what he's doing for food. What's even more strange to me is how quickly it goes from this scene of Patrick chasing down the truck back to the main plot. I get that the show is very fast paced, but in this particular instance, it just seems like the only reason they made that scene was to make that joke. Because in all honesty, the scene does nothing to move Patrick's plot forward. You could have taken out this scene and the episode would have functioned normally.
At my age, your only enemy is time. Now grab a hammer and laugh in Father Time.
Granddad's part here is also really entertaining, and he probably is my favorite character out of the whole bunch. He has that kind of old man energy where he's almost going to go completely off the rails, but is still funny and full of character. I really enjoy him because he's just so expressive when he's telling his stories. That's what I want to see in the show. Not a bunch of ideas that were haphazardly thrown together, not a main character who has no interesting qualities, not a sidekick who basically has no character. I just want to see good characters and a good story with that classic SpongeBob charm. The episode ends with Patrick going on an ice cream-induced rampage, and that was Enemies a la mode. This episode definitely has its high points. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like it was horrible, but in terms of Patrick as a main character, and the idea behind the show being nothing more than a side thought at times, and the general lack of a sense of direction with the plot, the Patrick Star Show fails on all fronts. There is another episode that I want to talk about from the show that highlights an even bigger problem I have, so consider this part 1. I'm gonna leave some space between this review and the next one because I don't want to have the same topic on my channel back to back, and I have another project planned that I've been wanting to do for a long while now, so I should probably get to work on that now. Until next time, I've been Papercut, and take care.